It was a quiet Saturday afternoon, and I was finally enjoying some time alone in the house. My husband, Mark, had left early that morning for a business trip, one of many that seemed to be coming up more often lately. It wasn't unusual, his job required it, and I was used to these solo weekends. But something about this time felt different. Maybe it was the tension we hadn't addressed or the uneasy feeling that had settled in my chest since he packed his suitcase. I spent most of the morning tidying up, hoping to distract myself from the nagging thoughts in the back of my mind. I had just finished making a cup of tea and was settling down on the couch when I heard a faint knock at the door. I wasn't expecting anyone, so I hesitated for a moment before finally getting up to see who it was. To my surprise, it was Eric, my brother-in-law. He was standing there with his usual charming smile, holding a bottle of wine. Eric and I had always gotten along well. He was Mark's younger brother, a bit of a free spirit compared to Mark's more serious nature. We'd had our share of laughs and good times, but I never expected him to just show up out of the blue. "Hey, Claire," Eric greeted, his smile widening. "I thought I'd stop by and keep you company since Mark's out of town. I know how boring it can get." I smiled back, though I couldn't help but feel a slight twinge of confusion. Eric had never come over without Mark before. Still, I didn't want to be rude, and a little company didn't sound so bad. "Sure, come in," I said, stepping aside to let him enter. "I was just about to watch a movie. You can join me if you want." We sat on the couch, and Eric uncorked the wine, pouring us both a generous glass. We chatted casually about Mark's trip, work, and some recent family gossip. It was easy and light, and I started to relax, letting the unease slip away. But as the afternoon wore on, I began to notice subtle changes in Eric's demeanor. His compliments seemed to come a bit too frequently, his glances lingered a little too long. It was nothing overt, nothing I could pinpoint exactly, but it made me feel uneasy. Maybe it was the wine, or maybe it was something else entirely, but the atmosphere had shifted, and I couldn't quite place why. At one point, Eric excused himself to use the bathroom, and I took the opportunity to get up and freshen up in the kitchen, trying to clear my head. When I returned, I found Eric standing in the hallway, peering into my bedroom. My bedroom, where Mark and I shared our most private moments. The door was slightly ajar, and Eric seemed lost in thought as he gazed inside. "Eric," I called, my voice sharper than I intended. He turned quickly, a flash of something unreadable in his eyes. "Oh, sorry, he started then shrugged, as if brushing off the moment. "Just got a bit lost, I guess." There was an awkward pause, and I could feel the tension hanging in the air. Something wasn't right, but I couldn't quite grasp what it was. I brushed it off, telling myself I was overreacting, but the feeling wouldn't go away. We moved back to the living room, but the conversation felt strained. I noticed that Eric's eyes kept wandering, almost as if he was searching for something. It made me uncomfortable, and I started to regret inviting him in. I glanced at the clock and realized how late it had gotten. "It's getting late," I said, hoping he'd take the hint. "I should probably start dinner." Eric nodded, but didn't make any move to leave. Instead, he leaned back on the couch, his gaze fixated on me in a way that made my skin crawl. It was like he was waiting for something, some kind of signal, but I didn't know what. "You know, Claire," he said, his voice low and almost conspiratorial. "You deserve more than what Mark's been giving you lately." I froze, my mind racing.
What did he mean by that?
Was he talking about the business trips, the late nights at the office? I opened my mouth to respond, but the words caught in my throat. Eric's expression had changed. It was no longer the easygoing smile I knew. There was something darker there, something that made me take a step back. Eric, I think you should go." I finally managed, my voice unsteady. For a moment, he didn't move. He just stared at me, as if weighing his options, and then, finally, he stood up. But instead of heading for the door, he stepped closer, closing the gap between us. My heart pounded in my chest as I took another step back, but the wall was behind me, and I had nowhere to go. "Claire, listen," he said, his voice a mix of pleading and something more insistent. "I've seen the way Mark treats you. I've seen how unhappy you are. You deserve better, someone who actually sees you." His words hit me like a punch to the gut. I didn't know if he was saying it out of concern, or if it was just an excuse for whatever this was turning into. I pushed past him, my breath coming in quick, shallow gasps, and reached for the door. "Eric, you need to leave," I said, my voice shaking.
Now.
He paused, and for a split second, I thought he might try to argue. But then he sighed, running a hand through his hair, and nodded. Without another word, he turned and walked out, leaving me standing there, stunned and shaken. I locked the door behind him, my hands trembling. What just happened? I couldn't make sense of it, and the unease that had been simmering all afternoon now boiled over. I sank onto the couch, my mind replaying every moment, every look, every word. I had trusted Eric.
He was family.
But now, all I felt was confusion and betrayal. That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. I kept thinking about what Eric had said, about Mark, about me. It was true that things hadn't been perfect, that there was a distance between us that neither of us seemed willing to address. But did that justify what had happened? Did that mean I was wrong to push Eric away? I didn't know, and the uncertainty gnawed at me. The next morning, I woke up to a message from Eric. It was short, apologetic, but it didn't address what had happened. Just a simple, "Sorry if I overstepped. Let's forget it, okay?" As if it could be that easy, as if words could erase the tension that still lingered in the air. I didn't respond.
I didn't know what to say.
I spent the day trying to go about my usual routine, but everything felt off. The house felt too quiet, too empty. I kept glancing at my phone, half expecting another message, but it never came. A few days later, Mark returned from his trip. He walked through the door, weary but smiling, and pulled me into a hug. I wanted to tell him everything, to lay it all out and let him in on the turmoil that had taken root in his absence. But as I looked into his eyes, I couldn't bring myself to say the words. What would it accomplish? Would it make things better, or would it just drive another wedge between us? So I kept quiet. I pretended that everything was fine, that nothing had changed. But the truth was, I couldn't stop thinking about that afternoon with Eric. It was like a shadow that followed me everywhere, a constant reminder of what had almost happened. Mark noticed that I was distracted, distant. He asked if everything was okay, and I lied, telling him I was just tired, that I'd been busy while he was away. He accepted it, but I could see the doubt in his eyes. He wasn't convinced, and neither was I. The days turned into weeks, and Eric's visits became less frequent. I avoided him whenever I could, making excuses or simply not answering the door when he came by. I didn't know how to face him, how to pretend that everything was normal when it clearly wasn't. One evening, Mark and I were having dinner when he brought up Eric. He mentioned that Eric had been acting strange, that he seemed distant even with him. I tried to keep my expression neutral, but my heart raced. "Do you know if something happened between you two?" Mark asked, his brow furrowing. "He's been kind of off lately." I shook my head, forcing a smile. "No, nothing happened. Maybe he's just going through something." Mark nodded, but I could tell he wasn't satisfied with that answer. I hated lying to him, but I couldn't bring myself to tell him the truth. It felt like a betrayal, not just of Mark, but of everything we had built together. That night, as I lay in bed beside Mark, I couldn't help but think about the choices I had made. I had let Eric into my home, into my space, and now I was paying the price. I didn't know how to fix it, how to go back to the way things were before. All I knew was that I couldn't keep living with the secret, this weight that threatened to crush me. In the weeks that followed, I tried to focus on rebuilding my relationship with Mark. I made an effort to be more present, to really listen when he talked about his day. We started going out more, trying to reconnect in ways we hadn't done in a long time. It wasn't easy, and there were times when I felt like I was going through the motions, but I was determined to make it work. As for Eric, I kept my distance. I didn't reach out, and he didn't try to contact me again. It was as if we had both silently agreed to pretend that nothing had happened, to sweep it all under the rug and move on. But I couldn't forget, and I knew that the memory of that afternoon would always be there, lurking in the back of my mind. Looking back, I realize now how close I came to crossing a line I could never uncross. It was a moment of weakness, a fleeting temptation that could have destroyed everything I held dear. I don't know if I made the right choices, but I do know that I learned something valuable about myself, about the importance of boundaries, and about the consequences of letting the wrong people into your life. Eric and I may never speak of that day again, and maybe that's for the best. But as I move forward, I hold on to the hope that I can rebuild what was broken, that I can find a way to be honest with myself and with those I love. Because in the end, that's all we can really do. Learn from our mistakes and try to do better.